This one's called The Legend. It's from 1999. It's in the category of a what-if story. There was a lack of leadership at the end of the century. We were all waiting to see what would happen next. I remember where I was the day of the announcement. I was living in Brooklyn, and the Yankees were in the pennant race. I was 31 and trying to make it as an actor or a writer. I didn't care which. It was October after a full moon, and the air in the city had become cool. I didn't own a television then. Usually I got the news from looking over somebody's shoulder on the train, but that day it was impossible not to know, so I was in a bar. My job was in Manhattan, but I had a pretty kind commute on the 7 each morning. In the evenings, I used to drink a lot, so often I took a cab home. The announcement was made during prime time. I had been in the West Village near Chelsea, so I headed east until I found myself in a suitably quiet place for a drink. There were 3 others in the bar, on my side, all men. The bartender was about my age, too. We checked each other out when I walked in, but she wasn't interested. Let me know with a glance. She was attending to us and going back to the telephone where she was involved in a casual conversation. That's how we heard, she told us. She was on the phone with her roommate, I discovered later, who had told her to turn on the TV. The television was off when I walked in, which is why I walked all the way down the bar and sat by it. I was putting room between me and the other patrons and the bartender on her phone call. I didn't feel like talking to anyone, just wanted a drink or two before going home. She walked down the length of the bar toward me, though my glass was still half full. "Jordan's on ESPN," she said, as she passed me with an air of excitement. She reached up and turned on the TV. I moved over to get some perspective and ended up sitting next to one of the other guys. "Perfect timing," he was saying to his friend. "It's Storybook." We were all looking at the television for a moment when we realized at our own pace it was a commercial. Then we turned away from the TV to notice each other. The guy to my left was a know-it-all Cliff Clavin type. His Norm was an appropriately fat guy to his left who was listening, bored. "There's not going to be any basketball this year. The league's locked out," says Cliffy. "It'll be the first strike in NBA history. And look at this, Jordan's going to retire before it gets ugly." He looks at the both of us, including me in their space. "Storybook, man. This guy's all class. His entire career. CLASS." It seemed about right. We had all been waiting for the announcement, fans and not fans. We had been well prepared by the rumors and gossip for the last few months. The other guy, Norm, wasn't so sure about all the class, but he had his favorite Jordan moment. "My company's had floorside Knicks seats for years," he began. "I had finished doing the numbers for the annual report a few years ago, and so they let me have the tickets as a kind of bonus, you know." The ad was for Nike, a long narrative about a couple of guys buying sneakers with all these idiotic effects meant to be impressive. They were playing one-on-one at what was meant to be an inner-city court, but that looked more like a Hollywood lot. An appearance by Tiger Woods. Hits a three-pointer with a golf club or something. Stupid. I turned away from the TV. "Jordan was off in the first half, shot maybe 4 for 15 from the field. Just didn't have the rhythm," continued Norm. "But during the warm-ups before the second half, the Bulls were down at our end, so I could see him up close. He seemed so casual. He was just joking around and chewing his gum. He stopped during the shoot-around to sign some kid's little plastic ball at courtside." Norm turned to face us, making a little circle. He glanced over his shoulder at the TV to make sure it was still a commercial before continuing. "Knicks were up 5 at the break, and the second half started with Jordan bringing the ball down." "Here we go," chimed in Cliffy. "Never let Jordan bring the ball down up 5 at the beginning of the second half," he said, as if that made any kind of sense. The Nike ad was followed by an ad for the new BMW convertible. It was being featured in a movie. Hot babe racing at speeds meant to appear saucy around curves on the Pacific Coast Highway. But it was stagey and excessive, a patina of production slathered across it. "And it wasn't that the rest of the game was so impressive," Norm said, "because he went 12 for 18 in the second half and ended up with 42 points, 8 boards, and 4 steals on the night." "Whoa!" chimed in Cliffy. See? Norm continued. "But it wasn't that. It was that first bucket after the second half started." Norm looked at us both significantly. "He went coast to coast, juked twice, burned Starks and Oakley on the way to the rack. The slam. It was like he was waiting to turn it on. And once it was on, there wasn't anybody to stop it. We were all silent for a minute, wishing we had that. When ESPN came back on. If the Yanks lose tomorrow, Joe Torre will have a decision on his hands, El Duque or Andy Pettitte. But as Andy Schaap reports, the decision may have already been made. Yanks better fucking win the series, I said. It was the first time I'd spoken to them, and they noticed. I have a sort of a Mike Tyson voice problem. It's sort of squeaky. I'm real aware of it now. I mean, at the time, I hadn't fully developed my speaking skills to use it to my advantage. So there was always a minute or two when it freaked people out. A grown man. It's really why I became a writer, as opposed to going into, say, radio or television. Cliff blew right by it. Fuck yeah, the fucking Yanks better win the fucking series. Better win the World Series, too. I mean, what the fuck? After the season they had? If they don't win, heads will definitely roll. We talked about the Yanks for a minute as the time passed. I know, it has to seem stupid now, but, I mean, we had no idea what Jordan was going to say. We were all just figuring he'd retire, we'd bullshit a bit, and that'd be that. On to baseball. We were strangers in a shitty little bar in the East Village. By now, of course, the video has been shown umpteen times. The stage set in Chicago and the introduction. All of it has been ingrained in our heads for as long as the little bitmaps will last in our memories. But let's just review what he said, how he said it. I mean, if we're going to talk about a legend, it's good to be precise. Jordan stepped up to the microphone. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to make this as brief as possible, but there are many people to thank. I have played my entire career here in Chicago, and I have always felt the deepest love for this city and the fans. It is without a doubt in my mind that these are the greatest fans in the world. He always had that sweet, disarming way of saying something just a little off that still sounded so right and perfect coming out of his mouth. The man had skills. He continued, I have faced a lot of questions this past summer about my plans for the future, and I have entertained all kinds of opportunities and thoughts on the matter of retirement. Frankly, I don't want to give up basketball. I love this game. And that look, that smile directly into the camera, for the fans at home, for the commissioner of basketball, it was perfect. He knew all along what he was doing. There was never a feeling of doubt that he was in control, only of wonderment that he was alive. It was like that on the court and afterward. He was a great leader. Jordan turned, looked left and right. That is why I have to ask you for your support at this critical and important time in my career. I need each and every one of my fans, everywhere in the world, to know that I have enjoyed every minute of my career in the NBA. I wouldn't trade it for anything. And now I need something back from you. I need your continued support. It was at this point that I anyway, began to wonder if he didn't have a surprise in mind. I had thought it before, of course. He was famous for them. Baseball. But that night, I mean, he looked to the right and left, and then for a second it seemed like maybe he was changing his mind right there before letting us all in on the biggest move of his career. It still seemed like he had something else in store. I remember the announcement and the introduction perfectly. I am retiring from the National Basketball Association. Smile. Flash, flash, flash. Flash, 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 flash. Click, 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 click. I would like to thank everyone, but of course, that's impossible. Let me just reiterate my thanks to the wonderful people here in Chicago and to my fans around the world. He said things twice his entire career to emphasize his point in a different manner, to get it across to as many channels of media on the spectrum as possible, and was misunderstood by many as just being a jock. But like Coltrane, Jordan was ahead of his time with the media. Again, I hope you will continue to support my efforts as I move on away from the NBA and into public life in other ways. This was the stumper, of course. He had every free male in the nation caught on by then that it wasn't your average resignation. What the fuck is he talking about? Not baseball again. Jeez, the guy was a sub-200 hitter on a farm club, for God's sake. Fickle guy, that Cliffy. Then the introduction. I would like to introduce now my first partner in my new life after the NBA, Jordan said. When he walked out, I swear you could have knocked me off my bar stool. I was totally confused. I had no explanation for what he was doing there. I quickly tried to add up scenarios that would bring the two of them together, but never in my wildest dreams could I have figured out what would happen next. Jordan looked at everyone and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, a boxer, a pugilist of world renown." He said pugilist carefully and playfully, like he had looked it up for the event, toyed with it for a while, then decided to keep it for the fun of it. And he gave us a smile when he continued, "The world's greatest fighter in my book. And I challenge anyone to deny it. Ladies and gentlemen, President Nelson Mandela of the Republic of South Africa." The flashbulbs made it impossible to see for a moment. Everyone was standing. Jordan must have made arrangements for the cameraman to be positioned, though, because the television audience had a clear view throughout the proceedings. Then he appeared. Mandela. It was such an incredible feeling to be watching it live. Mandela walked with such cool grace, slowly and stately, past the podium, hugged Jordan, and took a seat. Michael had effectively taken the spotlight off himself at the peak of his most significant hour. The entire experience was like watching a game. He was masterful, in control, and nobody was stopping him. Jordan continued, "Mr. Mandela and I would like to announce that, effective immediately, I will be player coach of the South African national basketball team to participate in the year 2000 Olympics in Sydney, Australia. I hereby invite my friends, colleagues, and players from all over the world to try out for the team that we will field in summer of 2000. I would also like to announce the creation of a new line of shoes, clothing, and athletic wear, designed for the new South African team by my own designers, and to be manufactured by textile workers throughout Africa. All proceeds from the sales of these products, that's 100% of the proceeds, will go in 2 equal parts. First, to the United Nations, and second, to a nonprofit organization begun by President Mandela and myself toward the creation of a free, peaceful, healthy, and well-developed Pan-Africa in the next millennium." I was numb. My ears were filled with a dull sensation that removed me from my surroundings. I couldn't stand. I couldn't possibly sit. I stood. I hugged Cliff. I slapped Norm on the back. I pulled the bartender over the rail and kissed her full on the lips. And she hit me. The end. There's a note here I wrote some years later. That story was from 1999. Of course, Jordan didn't retire that way, and none of that happened. But there's a note here. It says, "I can't even remember when Jordan retired now. He quit, came back, jammed again, quit, came back, managed the Wizards for a time, always plays great golf, a giant. I wrote this piece in 1998 after a conversation with a friend about why U.S. American sports stars don't take more active political stances anymore. C.F. Tommy Smith or Arthur Ashe or many others." This was half a decade before Colin Kaepernick, of course. It seems relevant today, but nostalgic, and weirdly attached to an era when television affiliates in every city in the United States were running simultaneous and continuous reruns of Cheers, sometimes twice a day, rather than fill the spectrum with any diversity.